The blood-curdling scream echoed through the presidential suite of Kinshasa's Hotel Intercontinental. David Marshall, CIA field operative, froze mid-stride. 3 armed men in military uniforms stood over a body slumped in an ornate chair. The gleaming marble floor was stained with crimson. All eyes locked on him as the door swung shut behind him with a damning click. "You're early," said a voice from the shadows. Colonel Richard Stanton, Marshall's handler, stepped forward, gun in hand. "You weren't supposed to see this." Marshall's training kicked in. He assessed his options in microseconds. 3 armed guards, his handler with a drawn weapon, and himself, unarmed, having left his service weapon locked in the hotel safe as instructed for this routine briefing. "Sir, what's happening here?" Marshall kept his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. The room smelled of gunpowder and expensive cologne. His eyes darted to the slumped figure, a man in an elegant suit, a diplomatic pin on his lapel. Not just any diplomat. The Congolese Minister of Interior Affairs, Pierre Mulele, a key figure in the upcoming negotiations. "Change of plans," Stanton replied coolly, gesturing with his gun. "The president wants a different outcome for tomorrow's fight." Mulele was being uncooperative. Marshall's mind raced. The fight, code for the boxing match between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali scheduled for tomorrow in Kinshasa. President Mobutu had staked his nation's reputation on this global spectacle, investing millions to showcase Zaire to the world. But Marshall knew the CIA had other interests in the event, using the international media presence as cover for a major intelligence operation. "Sir, this wasn't in the briefing. We're supposed to be monitoring Soviet activity, not—" "Plans change, Marshall." Stanton cut him off. "You think this is just about a boxing match?" Mulele was meeting with KGB operatives yesterday. He was going to expose our entire operation to the Soviets. The guards shifted nervously, fingers on triggers. Through the grand windows of the suite, the lights of Kinshasa twinkled against the night sky, oblivious to the tension unfolding 40 floors above the city streets. "We need to clean this up," Stanton continued, his voice dropping to a businesslike tone. "No traces, no witnesses." His gaze hardened as he looked at Marshall. "Which puts us in a difficult position regarding you." Marshall felt his mouth go dry. 26 years old, 3 years in the field, and now he was facing the end of his career, or worse, at the hands of his own handler. "I can help," Marshall said quickly. "Whatever's happening, I'm on your team, Colonel." A knock at the door made everyone freeze. Marshall's heart pounded against his ribs. "Room service," called a woman's voice. Stanton nodded to one of the guards who moved to the door, weapon ready. Marshall saw his opening, perhaps his only chance. As the guard reached for the door handle, Marshall lunged toward the balcony doors. Glass shattered as he crashed through, bullets splintering the frame inches from his head. The cool night air hit him as he landed hard on the balcony, rolling to his feet. 40 floors up, nowhere to go but through the neighboring suite. He smashed through the connecting balcony door as bullets pinged off the concrete around him. Inside the dark room, a startled woman screamed. Marshall held a finger to his lips. "CIA, your life is in danger. Stay quiet and stay down." She nodded wide-eyed, ducking behind the bed. Marshall grabbed the room phone, dialing frantically. "Operator, connect me to room 612. Now." His only hope was his partner, Rebecca Chen, 3 floors down. The phone rang once, twice. "Hello?" Rebecca's voice cautious. "Code red, suite 401. Mulele's dead. Stanton's involved. They're coming for me." "Jesus, David, where are—" The line went dead. Marshall dropped the receiver and moved to the door, pressing his ear against it. Footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets. Heavy. The woman behind the bed whimpered. African, early 30s, wearing hotel staff uniform. A witness they wouldn't want alive. "What's your name?" Marshall whispered. "Adeline," she replied, trembling. "Adeline, I need you to trust me. These men will kill us both. Is there another way out of this room?" She pointed to a service door partially hidden by a decorative screen. "Staff corridor. It connects to the kitchen level." Marshall helped her up. "Stay close. Don't make a sound." As they slipped through the service door, Marshall heard the main door to the room being kicked open. The hunt was on. And somewhere in the chaos of Kinshasa, on the eve of the biggest sporting event in Africa's history, answers awaited, if he could stay alive long enough to find them. The service corridor was dimly lit, pipes running along the ceiling. Adeline moved with surprising confidence, leading Marshall through the labyrinth of narrow passages. The distant sound of pursuing footsteps echoed behind them. "How long have you worked here?" Marshall whispered as they descended a narrow stairwell. 5 years, Adeline replied. "I know every corner of this hotel." Marshall's mind was processing information at lightning speed. Mulally dead. Stanton involved. The fight tomorrow. It didn't add up. The CIA was supposed to be gathering intelligence, not assassinating officials. They emerged into a bustling kitchen. The preparations for tomorrow's gala were in full swing, with dozens of staff working frantically even at this late hour. Marshall grabbed a white chef's coat from a hook, slipping it on over his blood-stained shirt. "Is there a staff exit?" he asked Adeline. She nodded, pointing toward a loading dock. "There. But there are always guards." Marshall checked his watch. 10:37 p.m. Rebecca would be implementing emergency protocols by now, if she believed him. "I need to get to the fight venue," he told Adeline. "The stadium." Her eyes widened. "The Stade du 20 Mai? At this hour? It's locked down tight. Security everywhere for tomorrow. That's exactly why I need to go there." Marshall suspected whatever Stanton was planning centered around the fight. 20 Mai Stadium was 20 minutes away, if he could get out of the hotel alive. They approached the loading dock. 2 guards stood by the exit, checking IDs of workers leaving. Marshall spotted a truck being loaded with tablecloths and napkins. "Those linens, where are they going?" he asked Adeline. "To the stadium, for tomorrow's VIP reception." Marshall squeezed her arm. "I need your help one more time, then you should run. Get somewhere safe, somewhere public." She hesitated, then nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Marshall whispered instructions. Moments later, Adeline approached the guards, engaging them in animated conversation in Lingala. Marshall slipped behind stacks of crates edging toward the truck. The driver was nowhere to be seen. As Adeline kept the guards distracted, Marshall climbed into the back of the truck, burrowing beneath stacks of freshly laundered linens. His heart pounded in his ears. Minutes later, he felt the truck engine start, the vehicle beginning to move. Through a small gap in the canvas covering the truck bed, Marshall watched the hotel recede into the distance. Kinshasa at night was a mix of bright lights and dark patches. Power outages were common, even in the capital. President Mobutu had spent millions bringing the fight to Zaire, but the country's infrastructure remained fragile. The truck wound through crowded streets. Even close to midnight, the city was alive with excitement over tomorrow's fight. Street vendors sold counterfeit merchandise, and bars overflowed with patrons discussing the prospects of Foreman versus Ali. 20 minutes later, the truck slowed. Marshall peered out to see the massive silhouette of the stadium against the night sky. Floodlights illuminated the exterior, security personnel patrolling the perimeter. The truck passed through a checkpoint, then backed up to a service entrance. Marshall waited until the driver stepped out before emerging from his hiding place. Slipping through shadows, he entered the stadium through an unguarded service door. Inside, the vast arena was eerily quiet. The boxing ring stood in the center, ropes gleaming under work lights. Crews were still preparing, installing last-minute camera positions and communication equipment. Marshall needed to find a secure phone. He made his way toward the administrative offices, keeping his head down, the chef's coat providing minimal disguise. As he rounded a corner, he collided with a tall man in a security uniform. "ID," the guard demanded in French-accented English. Marshall reacted instinctively. A quick strike to the solar plexus, followed by a chop to the back of the neck as the guard doubled over. He dragged the unconscious man into a storage closet, taking his radio and security badge. The administrative wing was locked, but the security badge granted access. Marshall found an empty office with a phone. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed a number from memory. "African Continental Resources," answered a clipped voice. "Authorization code 47 Alpha Tango 9. Field Operative Marshall requesting emergency extraction. Cover compromised. Handler gone rogue." A pause. "Verification required. Mother's maiden name. Westbrook. Stand by." The line went silent for 30 agonizing seconds. "Extraction denied pending investigation. Maintain position and await further instructions." "You don't understand," Marshall hissed. "Stanton killed Malel. He's planning something during the fight. I need backup. Your handler has reported you as compromised, possibly working with Soviet intelligence. Stand down, Agent Marshall." The blood drained from Marshall's face. Stanton had already covered his tracks, painting Marshall as the traitor. "Listen to me. Lives are at stake. The fight tomorrow? The line went dead. Marshall slammed the receiver down in frustration. He was on his own. The radio he'd taken from the guard crackled to life. All units, we have an intruder in Section C. Possible CIA operative considered armed and dangerous. Shoot on sight, repeat, shoot on sight. Marshall moved to the window, peering out at the stadium grounds. Flashlight beams crisscrossed the darkness as security teams began a systematic search. He was trapped. A noise from the doorway made him spin around, dropping into a defensive stance. Rebecca Chen stood there, pistol aimed at his chest. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, her expression a mixture of confusion and determination. "Don't move, David," she said quietly. "I don't want to shoot you, but I will." "Becca, thank God," Marshall started to say. "Shut up. Stanton told me everything. How long have you been feeding intel to the Soviets?" Marshall felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Is that what he told you? I walked in on him standing over Mulili's body. He's the one who's compromised." Doubt flickered across Rebecca's face, but her aim remained steady. "Why would Stanton kill a Zairean minister?" "I don't know yet, but it's connected to the fight tomorrow. Something big is happening and Mulili was going to expose it. Or maybe you killed him because he discovered you were a double agent," Rebecca countered. "Think, Becca. You've known me for 3 years. Have I ever given you reason to doubt me?" She hesitated. Outside, the search parties were getting closer. "We don't have time for this," Marshall urged. "If you're going to shoot me, do it. Otherwise, help me figure out what Stanton is planning." Rebecca lowered her weapon slightly. "You have 5 minutes to convince me." Marshall moved slowly to the desk, finding a blueprint of the stadium. "Tomorrow, this place will hold 60,000 people, including President Mobutu, dozens of diplomats, and international media. The perfect cover for something bigger." "Like what?" "I think," Marshall began but was cut off by a deafening explosion that shook the building. Alarms blared as smoke began filling the corridor outside. "What the hell was that?" Rebecca exclaimed. Marshall grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. "That was our 5 minutes running out. We need to move now." As they fled down the corridor, another explosion rocked the stadium. Through a window, Marshall saw flames erupting from the eastern stands. The pieces began falling into place. This wasn't about the fight at all. It was about creating chaos. The perfect distraction. But for what? Smoke billowed through the corridors as Marshall and Rebecca ran, ducking low to avoid the worst of it. The stadium's emergency sprinklers had activated, drenching them as they navigated the maze-like interior. "This way," Marshall shouted over the blaring alarms, pulling Rebecca toward a service exit. "We need to get to the presidential box." "Why there?" Rebecca yelled back, her gun still ready in her hand. "Think about it. If this is a diversion, what's the real target? Tomorrow, Mobutu and every high-ranking official in Zaire will be sitting in that box." Understanding dawned on Rebecca's face. They burst through a fire door onto an exterior stairwell. Below them, chaos reigned. Security personnel rushed toward the flames while local fire crews struggled to organize their response. "David, look!" Rebecca pointed upward. A helicopter hovered near the roof of the stadium, its searchlight sweeping the grounds. "That's not a rescue chopper," Marshall observed, noting the lack of markings. "Too small. Military grade." They climbed the stairs rapidly, reaching the upper level where the luxury boxes were located. The presidential box stood at the center, its entrance guarded even amid the chaos. 2 men in black tactical gear stood alert, automatic weapons ready. "Not stadium security," Marshall whispered. "Those are professional mercenaries." "How do we get past them?" Rebecca asked. Marshall studied the corridor. "Maintenance access. There should be a way in through the ceiling." They backtracked to a utility closet. Marshall climbed onto Rebecca's shoulders, pushing aside a ceiling panel and hoisting himself into the narrow space above. He reached down, helping Rebecca up. Crawling through dust and insulation, they made their way toward the presidential box. Through gaps in the ceiling panels, Marshall could see more armed men inside the box itself. They were installing something in the walls and under the seats. "Explosives," Rebecca whispered, her face pale in the dim emergency lighting filtering through the ceiling. Marshall nodded grimly. "They're rigging the box to blow during the fight." One of the men below spoke into a radio. "Package is secure. Timers set for 1,300 hours tomorrow. Extraction in 10 minutes. That's during the expected 3rd round," Rebecca noted, "when all eyes will be on the ring." Marshall continued moving, reaching a point directly above the box. Through a ventilation grate, He could see the full operation. 6 men, all with military precision, were completing what appeared to be an elaborate assassination setup, and supervising them was Colonel Richard Stanton. Son of a bitch, Marshall breathed. It's not just Mobutu they're after, it's everyone. The entire government all at once. But why? Rebecca wondered. And who's behind it? Not our government, Marshall said firmly. This is something else. A coup, maybe. A creaking sound beneath them was their only warning before the ceiling panel gave way. Rebecca tumbled through the opening, landing hard on a table below. Marshall managed to grab a ceiling support, hanging precariously as chaos erupted. Intruder, one of the mercenaries shouted, raising his weapon. Rebecca rolled off the table, coming up shooting. 2 men fell before the others could react. Marshall dropped from the ceiling, landing behind a couch as bullets tore through the luxury furnishings. Marshall! Stanton's voice cut through the gunfire. I should have known you'd be too stubborn to die. It's over, Stanton, Marshall called back. Whatever you're planning stops now. Stanton laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. You have no idea what's happening here, do you? This is bigger than the CIA, bigger than America or the Soviets. This is about power. Real power. Marshall caught Rebecca's eye across the room, gesturing toward a control panel on the wall. She nodded slightly, understanding his plan. Who's paying you, Stanton? Marshall asked, keeping his former handler talking. The French? The Belgians? Or is it Mobutu's rivals within Zaire? Always the analyst, Stanton replied. Always looking for patterns. Sometimes, Marshall, people just want to watch the world burn. Marshall nodded to Rebecca. She fired 3 rapid shots at the control panel. The luxury box plunged into darkness as the private generator shut down. In the chaos that followed, Marshall moved like a ghost. His hand-to-hand combat training had earned him top marks at the farm, the CIA's training facility. In the darkness, that training proved lethal. He took down 2 mercenaries silently before reaching Stanton. His former handler was good, anticipating Marshall's attack, countering with a vicious elbow strike that sent pain shooting through Marshall's temple. You're good, kid, Stanton grunted as they grappled in the darkness. But I trained you, remember? I know all your moves. Not all of them, Marshall replied, executing a maneuver he'd learned from a Congolese informant, one he'd never shown his handler. Stanton gasped as Marshall's fingers found a pressure point on his neck, temporarily paralyzing him. The lights flickered back on. Rebecca stood by the door, a bleeding gash on her forehead but her gun steady on the remaining mercenary, who had wisely dropped his weapon. Marshall held Stanton against the wall. Talk. Who are you working for? Stanton's eyes burned with hatred. You think stopping me changes anything? The operation is already in motion. By this time tomorrow, Zaire will have a new government, one more amenable to our interests. Our? Marshall pressed. Whose interests, Stanton? A smile spread across Stanton's face. You ever wonder why a superpower like America cares about a boxing match in Africa? Do you know what's under this country, Marshall? Cobalt, uranium, copper, trillions in mineral wealth. Mobutu's been playing both sides, threatening to nationalize the mines. We can't have that. We? Rebecca asked, moving closer. The CIA? Stanton laughed. The CIA is just a tool. I'm talking about the real players, the corporations, the banks. They're the ones who decide who rules and who dies. Marshall spotted something on Stanton's wrist, a small device with a blinking red light. A detonator. Rebecca, the bombs! He shouted, lunging for Stanton's arm. Too late. Stanton pressed the button. Instead of an explosion, however, a high-pitched signal filled the air. What did you do? Marshall demanded, twisting Stanton's arm painfully. Insurance policy, Stanton gasped through the pain. That signal just armed every explosive in this stadium. They can't be disarmed now. Try to remove them, they blow. At 1300 hours tomorrow, this place becomes a crater. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder outside. Stanton's extraction team was arriving. You won't stop this, Marshall, Stanton continued. You can kill me, but the plan continues. Too many powerful people have too much money invested. Marshall exchanged a look with Rebecca. They both knew what was at stake now. Not just the lives of Zairean officials, but 60,000 spectators, international media, and 2 boxing legends. What do we do with him? Rebecca asked, nodding toward Stanton. Before Marshall could answer, the window behind them shattered as a rope dropped from the hovering helicopter. 3 armed men in tactical gear rappelled in, firing as they descended. Marshall and Rebecca dove for cover. In the confusion, Stanton broke free, grabbing the rope and signaling to his extraction team. "This isn't personal, Marshall," Stanton called as he was lifted toward the helicopter. "You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Marshall aimed carefully and fired, hitting Stanton in the shoulder. The colonel cried out but maintained his grip on the rope as he was pulled into the helicopter. "We can't let him get away," Rebecca shouted over the roar of the rotors. Marshall stared at the explosives installed throughout the presidential box, his mind racing. "We have bigger problems. If what Stanton said is true, we have less than 14 hours to evacuate 60,000 people and disable those bombs. Can we call it in? Get help?" Marshall shook his head. "Stanton will have locked us out of all official channels. As far as Langley knows, I'm a traitor and you're likely compromised too." Rebecca holstered her weapon. "So what's the play?" Marshall moved to the window, watching the helicopter disappear into the night sky. The stadium fires were now under control. Emergency crews swarming the grounds below. "First, we document everything. Those explosives, Stanton's confession, all of it. Then we find someone who'll listen." "Who?" "The local authorities are probably infiltrated too." Marshall's expression hardened. "There's one person whose interest aligns with ours right now. Someone who definitely doesn't want this stadium to blow up tomorrow." "Who?" "President Mobutu." The presidential palace was an imposing colonial structure, illuminated by floodlights against the pre-dawn sky. Marshall and Rebecca, exhausted and battered, stood at the service entrance facing a wall of skeptical security officers. "I'm telling you," Marshall insisted in French, "we have urgent information about a threat to the president's life. This cannot wait until morning." The head of security, a burly man with a scar across his left cheek, studied the CIA credentials Marshall had provided. "These could be forgeries and your story is difficult to believe. Call this number," Marshall said, writing down a direct line to CIA headquarters in Langley. "Tell them you have David Marshall in custody. They'll tell you I'm a wanted man, possibly a Soviet agent. That should convince you I'm who I say I am." The security chief raised an eyebrow. "You want me to call America to confirm you're an American traitor?" "Yes," Marshall said firmly, "because I'm not a traitor. But my own agency thinks I am, thanks to the real traitors who are planning to assassinate your president in approximately 10 hours. The security chief considered this for a long moment, then nodded to one of his men who disappeared inside with the number. Rebecca leaned close to Marshall. "Are you sure about this? Mobutu is hardly known for his fair treatment of suspected spies." "We're out of options," Marshall whispered back, "and out of time." Minutes later, they were escorted inside, disarmed, and thoroughly searched. The palace interior was a strange mix of traditional African art and European luxury, a reflection of Mobutu's complex relationship with his country's colonial past. After a tense half-hour wait in a guarded anteroom, the doors opened. Instead of the security chief, a tall, elegant woman in a business suit entered. "I am Marie Mbambo, Chief of Staff to President Mobutu," she announced in flawless English. "I understand you claim there is a plot against the president's life?" Marshall stood. "Madam, I know how this sounds, but we have evidence that explosives have been planted in the presidential box at the stadium. They're set to detonate during the fight today." Mbambo's expression remained neutral. "We receive threats against the president regularly, Mr. Marshall. What makes yours different?" "Because I saw the explosives being installed. Because my CIA handler, Colonel Stanton, is involved. And because this isn't just about Mobutu, it's about Zaire's mineral wealth and who controls it." At the mention of minerals, Mbambo's composure slipped slightly. She gestured for them to follow her through a series of corridors, eventually reaching an ornate office where President Mobutu himself sat behind a massive desk. Mobutu Sese Seko was younger than he appeared in photographs, his face stern beneath his signature leopard skin hat. He studied the Americans with calculating eyes. "Mr. Marshall," he said in accented English, "your own government says you are a traitor. Why should I believe anything you say?" Marshall stepped forward. "Mr. President, I understand your skepticism, but consider this. If I were working against American interests, why would my own handler frame me? And if I were working against Zairean interests, why would I come here to warn you?" Mobutu leaned back in his chair, "Perhaps to gain my trust for some other purpose." "We don't have time for games," Rebecca interjected. "In 8 hours, that stadium will be filled with 60,000 people, including you and your entire government. If you don't believe us, send your best bomb squad to check the presidential box. But do it carefully. The explosives are rigged to detonate if tampered with. Mobutu studied her for a moment, then pressed a button on his desk. The security chief entered immediately. Send a team to the stadium, Mobutu ordered. Discreet expert. Check the presidential box for explosives. No one touches anything until I receive a report. The security chief nodded and departed. Now, Mobutu continued, turning back to the Americans. While we wait, perhaps you can explain why the CIA would want me dead. Not the CIA officially, Marshall clarified. A rogue element within it, working with corporate interests. According to Stanton, it's about your threats to nationalize the mines. Mobutu smiled thinly. Ah, yes. My occasional reminders to our Western friends that Zaire's resources belong to Zaire. Those reminders have made powerful enemies, Marshall said. Enemies willing to replace you with someone more cooperative. Before Mobutu could respond, the door burst open. The security chief returned, his face ashen. Mr. President, they found them. Explosives professionally installed throughout the box, enough to destroy half the stadium. Mobutu's expression darkened. Can they be disarmed? The team says no. They're on a timer and rigged with anti-tampering devices. Highly sophisticated. Mobutu turned to Marshall. It seems I owe you my life, Mr. Marshall. What do you suggest we do now? Cancel the fight, Marshall said immediately. Evacuate the stadium. Mobutu shook his head. Impossible. This event has cost millions. The entire world is watching. Zaire's reputation will be destroyed if 60,000 people die. Rebecca finished for him. Mobutu rose from his desk, pacing. You don't understand what this fight means for Africa, for Zaire. This is our moment on the world stage. I cannot show weakness. Marshall stepped closer. Mr. President, there must be another way. What if we move your box? Announce a last-minute change? The conspirators would simply abort and try again another day. Mobutu replied. No, we must end this now. Capture or kill these traitors. How? Rebecca asked. Stanton is gone, probably already out of the country. Marshall's mind raced. Not necessarily. He'll want to confirm the operation's success. Standard protocol would be to maintain visual contact from a safe distance. The helicopter, Rebecca realized. They'll be watching from the air. Mobutu nodded to his security chief. Prepare anti-aircraft defenses around the stadium. Discreetly. Sir, Marshall cautioned. Shooting down a helicopter over a packed stadium creates its own risks. What do you propose instead, Mr. Marshall? Marshall glanced at his watch. 6 hours until the fight. We need to turn their plan against them. Let them think they've succeeded, then catch them when they least expect it. A slow smile spread across Mobutu's face. A trap. Exactly, Marshall confirmed. But we'll need to clear the presidential box without raising suspicions, and we'll need to find where Stanton is monitoring from. For the next hour, they developed their plan. Mobutu would announce a special viewing arrangement. He and key officials would watch the first rounds from a private room, joining the presidential box only for the later rounds. Meanwhile, Marshall and Rebecca would lead teams to locate and neutralize Stanton's observation post. As dawn broke over Kinshasa, Marshall stood on the palace balcony, watching the city come alive with excitement for the historic bout. Street vendors set up early, selling memorabilia and food. Citizens wore shirts supporting either Foreman or Ali. The anticipation was palpable. Rebecca joined him, handing him a cup of strong coffee. Get any sleep? Marshall shook his head. Couldn't shut my brain off. We should be on the first flight out of here, she said quietly. Let Mobutu's people handle this. You know we can't do that. Stanton is our responsibility. CIA mess, CIA cleanup. Rebecca sighed. If we survive this, we'll both be looking for new careers. Best case scenario, we're disavowed. Worst case, we're branded traitors. Marshall watched a group of children playing with a makeshift boxing ring in the street below. One boy prancing around like Ali while another stood firm like Foreman. Sometimes doing the right thing comes at a cost, he said softly. I can live with that. Can you? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Finally, she nodded. Let's go catch this bastard. By 11 a.m., the stadium was filling rapidly. The heat was oppressive, the atmosphere electric. Marshall, now dressed in Zairean military uniform provided by Mobutu, coordinated with local forces from a command post established in the stadium's security center. Reports came in regularly from teams scanning the surrounding area for Stanton's observation post. Nothing yet. At 12:30, the fighters began their ring walks. The crowd roared as Muhammad Ali appeared, dancing and waving to the spectators. George Foreman followed, stoic and powerful. The contrast between the two men mirrored the tension of the day: flash versus force, speed versus power, cunning versus strength. "Sir," a radio operator called to Marshall, "Team 3 reports a possible sighting. Abandoned office building 2 kilometers east of the stadium. 3rd floor. Multiple subjects with optical equipment." Marshall grabbed his radio. "Team 3. Confirm visual but do not engage. Wait for backup." Rebecca appeared at his side, also in military uniform. "Is it them?" "Maybe. Let's find out." They joined a team of Zairean special forces, approaching the building from the rear. The structure was dilapidated, clearly unused for years except for squatters. Perfect for an observation post. Good sightlines to the stadium, multiple escape routes, and unlikely to draw attention. The team moved silently up the stairwell. On the 3rd floor, Marshall signaled for the others to hold position while he and Rebecca advanced. Through a crack in a door, they could see 5 men gathered around surveillance equipment. Stanton stood at the window, binoculars trained on the stadium, his wounded shoulder bandaged. Marshall whispered final instructions to the team leader, then nodded to Rebecca. They burst through the door simultaneously with the Special Forces team entering through windows and a second door. "Freeze! Nobody move!" Marshall shouted. Stanton spun around, his face registering shock before settling into a cold smile. "Marshall, I underestimated you. Hands where I can see them," Marshall ordered, his weapon trained on his former handler. "It's over, Stanton." Stanton glanced at his watch. "Actually, it's just beginning. 1 minute to detonation. The presidential box is empty," Rebecca informed him with satisfaction. "Mobutu and his officials are safe. You failed." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Stanton's face. "Doesn't matter. The secondary objective will still be accomplished. Chaos. Destabilization. The fight canceled mid-bout. International embarrassment for Mobutu." "Not going to happen," Marshall said, moving closer. "The explosives have been contained. The only ones who know about them are in this room and Mobutu's inner circle." Stanton's hand moved slowly toward his pocket. "Don't," Marshall warned. "You still don't get it, do you?" Stanton said, his voice almost sad. "This was never just about Mobutu. It was about changing the balance of power in Central Africa, resources that will be crucial in the coming decades. Whoever controls Zaire's minerals controls the future. And your corporate backers promised you a piece of that future?" Marshall asked. Stanton shrugged. "A man has to plan for retirement." His hand suddenly whipped up, a small pistol appearing. Before he could fire, 3 shots rang out. Stanton staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as he collapsed. Rebecca lowered her smoking gun. Retirement canceled. In the distance, they could hear the crowd roaring. The fight was underway. Marshall knelt beside Stanton, who was gasping for breath, blood spreading across his chest. "Why, Colonel? Why betray everything you stood for?" Stanton coughed, blood speckling his lips. "You're so naive, Marshall. There are no good guys. Just winners and losers." His eyes glazed over, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Marshall stood slowly, holstering his weapon. One of the Zairean officers approached. "Mr. Marshall, President Mobutu wishes to speak with you. He is watching the fight from the secure room as planned." Marshall nodded. "Tell him we'll be there shortly." As the Special Forces team secured the remaining conspirators, Marshall moved to the window. In the distance, the stadium stood intact, the crowd inside oblivious to how close they had come to disaster. Rebecca joined him. "What happens now?" "Now?" Marshall turned to her. "Now we watch the fight. Then we face the music back home." "Worth it?" Marshall thought about the 60,000 lives they'd saved, about the children he'd seen playing in the streets that morning, about the moment of African pride that would have been shattered by violence. "Absolutely worth it," he said with conviction. Together they left the building, walking into the bright Kinshasa sun. Behind them, Stanton's body was being removed, a traitor who had chosen the wrong side of history. Ahead of them, a new challenge awaited, explaining their actions to a CIA that had been infiltrated by corporate interests and corrupt agents. But for now, in this moment, they had won. And somewhere in the stadium, As Muhammad Ali famously worked his rope-a-dope strategy against the favored George Foreman, history was being made. History that would inspire generations of Africans and people worldwide. History that almost never happened. As they drove toward the stadium, Marshall found himself thinking about the children he'd seen that morning, playing at being Ali and Foreman. They would grow up remembering this day, not as the day a massacre was narrowly averted, but as the day Africa stood proudly on the world stage. Some secrets, he realized, were worth keeping. The real victory wasn't just saving lives. It was preserving hope. And in a world often divided by Cold War and corporate greed, hope might be the most powerful weapon of all. In the decades to come, the true story of what happened in the presidential suite would remain classified, locked away in CIA files until finally declassified in 2023. A footnote in history, known only to a few, but its impact would be felt long before then, in the lives saved and the future preserved on that sweltering day in Kinshasa, when two boxers, two superpowers, and countless competing interests converged in a perfect storm of history. "You know," Rebecca said as they approached the stadium, "I think I'm rooting for Ali." Marshall smiled. The underdog with the quick wit and quicker hands. Somehow that doesn't surprise me. They shared a laugh as they stepped into history, a history they had helped ensure would unfold as it was meant to, free from the shadow of tragedy.